Hey y'all, it's Carolyn Bauerschalg with the Bauerschlag Group at Keller Williams out of Houston, Texas, bringing you part 5 of our investor series. If you've been following along, you've seen parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, which talk about why you might consider real estate investment in the first place, identifying an ideal target, financing that property, and then marketing it and screening the tenants that come through with their applications. Today we're going to cover some best practices and frequently asked questions. We're going to start off with protecting yourself and the investment. And then bringing this back to a 30,000 foot view. So the bigger picture, why are we doing this and what are some of the macroeconomic risks that you might have to consider, right? So let's get started. Protecting yourself and the asset is probably most easily achieved with insurance. And that might sound kind of obvious, but I want to bring it up because there's, I think, a temptation to maybe underinsure or to reduce your annual carrying costs. So what I always like to encourage people to do is to make sure that they're selecting an insurance policy that will actually protect them if or when something goes wrong. So when you're looking at these insurance policies, please don't pick a 2% deductible policy. I don't want you coming out of pocket a great deal if something actually does happen that you have to address. Next up, the lender may require that you have a vacancy rider or something for vandalism. So remember that the lender wants to protect their own asset or their interest in your asset. So they may require that you have a clause in your insurance that would cover things like vandalism or vacancy, which that might actually end up being better for you anyways, right? So make sure that you're covering that both with your lender when you purchase, but also with your insurer to make sure that you do have comprehensive coverage. We always want people to cover or to have flood insurance, and we've talked about this before. It's $485 if you've purchased a home that's either in the 500-year floodplain or in Zone X. If you're working with me, I probably would have asked you to consider not doing a 100-year floodplain property purchase because of the probability that it actually will flood, right? And then your insurance costs really go up as well. So with a flood policy that's going to cost you $485 a year, this is something that I really don't want you to skimp on. The other thing that I really want you to consider is getting yourself an umbrella policy. And we'll cover this in just a little bit in more detail, but as a person, you may consider having general liability insurance. So if something were to happen and the tenant were to try to come after you personally, that we're not just insuring the property, but we're also making sure that you're covered as well. The last thing that we really like to do with insurance is make sure that we stipulate in the lease that the tenant is responsible to maintain renter's insurance. Why? Renter's insurance is essentially contents insurance. So if something does happen and there's like an act of God or a hurricane, flood, fire, something, that you don't want the tenant to come to you and say, hey, I want you to make me whole on the things that I lost. That really is probably the tenant's responsibility to insure. So you can stipulate in special provisions of the lease that the tenant find and maintain their own renter's insurance. Okay, so it's about covering yourself and covering the tenant. Next up, let's talk about the home warranty. If you purchase a property with me, I probably negotiated a home warranty for you for that first year for anything that kind of goes wrong when you own it. And that home warranty covers what I like to refer to like the bumper to bumper coverage on a car. So it's going to be the things that are on the inside, like a dishwasher, a stove, your water heater, your AC unit. If something were to go wrong with that, I don't want you to incur big costs in the first year. But on the lease perspective, I really want you to consider maintaining a homeowner's insurance policy, a home warranty policy, because that home warranty is something that you can work into the lease. How? So you want the tenant to be responsible for the way in which they treat the home, right? So you probably don't want to hear about them saying, oh, the sink is clogged, or oh, the toilet's clogged, or oh, my light bulb went out, right? You want them to have a little bit of skin in the game. So what we like to do is we like to offer a home warranty policy and then to write into the lease that the tenant is responsible for paying the $75 trip charge for anything that is warranted that breaks, right? So that's another way to help add a layer of protection for yourself. Something else that we've done in special provisions is make things that are implicit in the lease more explicit. So in the Texas lease, there's a part that talks about how the tenant's responsible for anything that breaks that is negligent. Well, negligence kind of vague, right? And so if you've had issues with plumbing or specific issues in the past, then address them in your special provisions. So for instance, in our leases, we now write into them that the tenant is responsible for any damages as it relates to the improper disposal of things down sinks, dishwasher, toilets, drains, bathtubs, right? So if you're depositing things that don't belong in a plumbing system in the first place and you damage my property, I'm coming after you. I don't want to come after you. it's just something for you to do to make more explicit and to protect yourself. The thing about special provisions that I do want to point out is that it is something to cover with a real estate attorney. You want someone to read it and to give their thumbs up. We don't want to practice law in real estate by just adding things in willy-nilly. It is supposed to be for statement of fact. No if-then statements in the lease, so make sure that you run that by a real estate attorney. But for all intents and purposes, insure yourself and make sure that the person that's occupying their home knows the rules of engagement and how to treat that property going forward. The next question that we've seen a lot lately is around therapy animals. Therapy animals are, I think originally the intent was to make sure that landlords wouldn't punish someone that had a disability or a health consideration by charging a really high deposit or any kind of deposit for that therapy animal. What it's kind of turned into over the years, unfortunately, is that people are looking for ways to bring their pets into the house without having to necessarily pay for them. So recently, HUD has come out and said, hey, we want to protect the landlords a little bit here. So you never want to discriminate, right? And so you can't ask someone what their disability is, but you can ask for a physician's note for that therapy animal. So it's gotten really easy over the years for someone to go online and just print off, like for $20, some kind of certificate that says this is my therapy pet. But what you can stipulate as a landlord is, hey, let me see that physician's note. And that's legitimate, right? Because you want to help someone that needs legitimate help. You don't necessarily want to be thrown over a barrel with someone that's just trying to not pay for their pet. So that's a really important thing to explore. All right, so the next thing that I like to kind of try to insure against or hedge against is that we don't have ghost occupants in the home. And what do I mean by that? You looked at all the tenants that came through that were 18 years and older that provided you with a standardized TAR, Texas Association of Realtors, lease application. It is possible that someone would say, oh, I have a visitor, I have a guest that's staying in this home that is probably not a visitor, but more like a tenant, right? So you, the landlord, can stipulate the number of days that a guest can occupy on the property. You can stipulate the number of cars, and of course you've outlined in the lease who the actual occupants are. It is your right as a landlord to have regulation over that. So what I like to do is I like to write in 7 days is the number of days that a guest can be on the property without landlord approval, and then make sure that the number of cars that are allowed on the property correlate to the number of drivers in the home. Okay, so some people say, hey, I'm good with 30 days or 60 days, and of course that's the landlord's choice. My comment to you is going to be to protect yourself and to put 7 days in that lease application or in the lease itself. So the next thing is that the lease does say that the landlord is allowed to access the property at any time. You don't need the tenant's permission to go into the home, but it is good for you to establish that you're going to be coming into the home regularly for any kind of routine maintenance and inspection. So one of the things that we like to put into the special provisions is that the landlord has access to the property to change the air filters monthly and to check on the smoke detector batteries. You, the landlord, don't want to leave the property unobserved on the interior for the full duration of the lease. You want to make sure you're going in there and making sure that they are treating the property well and that there's not any extensive damage that's going on inside. Right? So help yourself and write this into your lease, or ask me to help you write this into your lease. The other thing that I like to encourage people is to establish rapport with their tenant. The rules are explicit in a lease. They say how the tenant can behave and how the tenant cannot behave and what the landlord's responsibilities are to the tenant. But what's interesting is that while Texas loves the landowner and Texas supports the consumer of land, meaning the homeowner, it gets a little muddy when we have a lease in place, right? So the Texas comes down and says tenants have rights, and they have a lot of rights. So if you were to Google landlord rights, what you're returned with, like on the first full page of hits, are what the rights are of the tenant. And so I want to make sure that you establish a healthy relationship with that tenant so that there's an ease and flow of communication that really is productive. On the flip side of that, I want you to uphold the terms that you've put into the lease. That lease is written to protect your interest, and I want you to make sure that you're following the rules that you set up to protect yourself. So for instance, if you write in that rent is due on the 1st of every month and it's late after the 3rd, and that there's a late fee on the 4th day, then charge the late fee. if you lead off with, oh, I'm not going to charge them the late fee, or oh, I don't want to charge them that trip charge, or oh no, everything's fine, you're opening the door for, hey, I know that we have this written agreement, but I don't really care about what is written, right? So you remember that you teach people how to treat you, and that like attracts like, so make sure that you are friendly, approachable, and helpful, collaborative and constructive, but also that you do have standards, and upholding those standards is not only okay, but critical, okay? The other question that I get a lot from people is, should I deed this property once I own it to an LLC? It's a little bit nuanced. So if you were to purchase this cash, I would say go ahead and put the property name into an LLC. There's no lender involved. They don't have to approve the LLC. So go ahead and deed it to an LLC at the time of purchase. The idea is that you're establishing some kind of layer of protection between the general public and your personal assets as a whole. There's nuances to that as well. And again, go talk to your real estate attorney, a defense attorney, a tax accountant, a tax attorney, and to get their opinions on it. I've actually done all of those things, so I'll share just a little bit of a tidbit with you. And it's maybe not necessarily to have to deed the property to an LLC, but to really make sure that you take care to insure yourself with a general liability policy. Okay, so if what you're trying to hedge against is that the tenant would come after you personally for something that happened to them in the home, the reality is that you want to make sure that you have a general umbrella policy over you, right? So I won't speak for an attorney, but the realities that I've come to understand are that you can establish an LLC, but it's fairly easy to be named both as the LLC and as the owner of the property personally if something were to go sideways with some kind of legal entanglement. So the best advice that I've gotten from my people over the years has been to maintain general liability insurance, and on the flip side of that coin, mandate that your renter maintain their own renter's insurance. The danger that I want to call out with deeding the LLC to or deeding the property to an LLC if you have a loan on it is that it is highly likely that in your note that you sign off at closing, that's 30 pages that we just breeze through, it says somewhere in there that if you are to change ownership to the property, the lender has the right to call the loan, meaning they can say, whoop, we didn't approve you as the owner when we issued this loan, so now that whole loan is due. So in an effort to potentially stave off any kind of liability, and you deed this LLC and your lender catches wind of it, they may say, hey, the whole rest of your note's due, and that could really be a problem for you. Right? From the lender's perspective, they lent to you, the individual, and not to the LLC that they know nothing about. So those are really some important considerations. So the advice that I've walked with personally has been to carry heavy personal liability insurance and to ask the renters in their leases or to mandate really that they carry renters insurance. So run that by your people as well. The other question that I get very frequently is, should I have a property management company involved? And I would say this is a personal choice and also probably a financial one. Management companies typically charge about 10% of the annual rent to take care of that property. So all of these things here on the left column that we've talked about are if you're managing the property, if you want to turn that over to someone and say, I don't want to deal with it, you can have a property management company involved. Understand that they may not be looking at the property the way that you are, and that you may still have a pretty good level of involvement with the home anyways. So what I've seen so far is that most of my people that own 2, 3, or 4 investment properties are still managing them themselves. If there's some more, then it may be more time intensive, and that property management company may make a lot of sense. It's a personal decision. I do want to also outline that it's a costly one. So if our margins are kind of narrow because we've got property taxes and a note that we're paying on monthly, then this may not be feasible for you to be profitable. But it's something to explore for sure. So let's flip over into the bigger picture. Some of the pushback or the hesitant nature that I see when people are exploring this idea for property investment is that this is a long horizon. This is a long-term decision that you're making. And what I always encourage folks to remember is that this really is not a short-term recall, this is an 8 to 10 year commitment that you're making, right? So there's a couple of things to really consider with that. And the first is to remember that real estate is highly volatile in the short term and extremely appreciable in the long run. So this is not designed for you to hop in 1 year, put a tenant in there, and then decide you don't like to do it and then bail. You would have paid closing costs, brokerage fees, any kind of little tussles to get the property in good shape, and then you're not really capitalizing either on the gains that the property would have or your annual rents, right? This is a long game, and that remember that the National Association of Realtors tells us that every single year, regardless of market condition, natural disasters, oil prices, anything, the National Association of Realtors tells us that these properties appreciate 3 to 5% every single year. So if you can stay in that home or own that home, let's say for 8 to 10 years, what we're talking about is appreciation on the low end of about 24% and on the high end 50%. And empirically, when I do these searches for clients and I research that, it holds true. I sent out a case study a couple of weeks ago and we had a 43% gain over a 12-year period, right? So it really does shake out in the long run. You are going to also have to budget for things like replacement, right? So we don't want to do this in a short-term mindset and not think about the cost of replacing a roof or an AC or a water heater or having to address plumbing issues. So make sure that you've got capital reserves there for that. The other question that I've been getting a lot from people lately, especially with all this market volatility, is should I invest in real estate or should I not? I would, again, say that this is a long-term decision, and real estate is illiquid. You can't just put it on the market and have your cash tomorrow. This is something that you would have to really go through pains to make sure that you sell if you were to choose to do so, right? And so for instance, this week in the market, we've seen a drop of anywhere between 20 and 25% on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. What we didn't see in the real estate market this week was a 25% drop in real estate values. So putting your investments into different classes of accounts or different types of properties is really a great idea long term. So purchasing real estate and hanging on to it is in a lot of ways a natural hedge against the market volatility that we see in the stock market. Now, provided that you choose an investment like the ones that we discussed over in video 2, which is something that's going to be infinitely valuable regardless of market volatility. So that's your tiny property with a 3-bed, 2-bath configuration, or some kind of townhome that would be easy to either purchase if you decided to sell, or to find a tenant if you want to keep it year after year after year, right? The other question I've been getting lately is about interest rate exposure. So interest rates have been really low for a long time. We saw them drop to 3% last week, and we saw them bounce up to 4.25% this week. But generally speaking, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really seen interest rates hover around 4.25% or lower. That's a historically low cost of borrowing. And so on the benefit side of that, it means that your carrying costs are low. And on the question mark side of that is, hey, if interest rates go up and most people make decisions off of monthly payment, will that damage my future value of my home? And I would say that it's a nuanced discussion, right? If you were to purchase an investment property or lease out a property that is not always attractive regardless of what's happening in our greater marketplace, then yeah, you may be a little exposed. But reasonably, if you're purchasing that tiny 3-bed, 2.5-bath, or that 4-bed, 2-bath home or a townhome, that property is always going to increase in value. And we saw this in when oil went out in 2015-16. People were selling off their very large and luxurious 4-bed, 3.5-bath homes with a pool. They were trying to find themselves a 3-bed, 2-bath home, so effectively reduce their carrying costs, right? And so what was very interesting is that the average price of home sales during that time was dropping, but the median was actually going up. So when we tie that back to real estate, all that to say that small properties or entry-level properties will always be attractive. So regardless of what the cost of borrowing is, I would say somebody somewhere is going to be able to identify that home as a great opportunity for them in the future. So my idea for you is to always consider making this an 8 to 10 year commitment so that you are insulated against the highs and lows of the market. The other thing that I want you to consider on a more macro level is that rents are the first thing to go up in price and the first thing to go right back out. So to use that oil example again, in 2013 and 14, when oil was flying high, rents were through the roof. As soon as oil busted, rents went way down. When we had Hurricane Harvey come through, right before Harvey, there were quite a few rental properties that were on the market. I think there was a 25% vacancy in apartments, and literally within 3 days, everything was gone. Right, and so those rental prices, people were considerate. They weren't, extorting people, but the rents were rental properties were immediately gone. So in 3 days, we went from 25% vacancy to nothing available. So rents are the first to pop up and the first to go back down. Natural disaster, oil prices, the economy, all kind of dictate those things. Apartment complexes are the other thing to consider. So whenever we're listing that property for lease every single year, I want us to make sure that we're evaluating the options that someone has to lease around them. So those apartment complexes generally put downward pressure on lease prices in the long term. So to bring this all back to a final idea, you are providing a wonderful service to someone who needs a wonderful place to live. So it is, what I love about real estate investment is that it's an opportunity to not only grow your wealth through real estate, but provide somebody with a really wonderful and enjoyable place to live while doing so. There's a lot of satisfaction that I get in helping people build their wealth through real estate, and I'm sure there's a lot of satisfaction that people have in being able to provide really great housing for their tenants as well. So if you have questions and you want to talk about real estate investment with me, I'm always here for you. Give me a shout or drop a comment in the line. This has really been a lot of fun for me, and I hope it's been great and informative for you. Y'all take care.